And welcome to the X Zone, everyone. I am Rob McConnell, and for the next 4 hours, I'm your host and your guide as together we cross the time-space continuum to this place that, for the past 28 years, I have been calling the X Zone. It's a place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. It's a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. And the X Zone comes to you Monday through Friday from 10 p.m. Eastern until 2 a.m. Eastern, right here on the X Zone Broadcast Network, Talkstar Radio Network, Mutual Broadcast Network, and iHeartRadio. If you would like to send us an email, it's very simple, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com. On all social media sites, X Zone Radio TV. And to find out about the programming we have available for you with our compliments 24/7, 365 on the X Zone Broadcast Network, just visit our website at www.xzbn.net. My first guest tonight, X Zone Nation, is Kathryn Casey. She's an award-winning journalist and author who has written for the Rolling Stone magazine, TV Guide, Reader's Digest, Texas Monthly, and many other publications. She's the author of 10 previous true crime books and the creator of the highly acclaimed Sarah Armstrong mystery series. Kathryn has appeared on Oprah, Oprah Winfrey's Oxygen Network, Biography, Nancy Grace, E! Network, TruTv, Investigation Discovery, and the Travel Channel and A&E. She is based in Houston, where she lives with her husband and their dog, Nelson. Joining me now is Kathryn Casey. And Kathryn, welcome to the X Zone.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Where did your love for true crime come from?
You know, it just kind of happened. You know how in life things just kind of fall in place?
Mm-hmm.
I was writing for magazines, and I kept getting assigned true crime cases to cover. And it just kind of turned out that I had a knack for them. So at one point I turned them in, I started doing books. They're kind of fascinating. You know, it's really interesting to look at the psychology behind the crimes.
You've got a new book out called Possessed. Can you tell us about it?
Sure. It's on the Houston, Texas stiletto murder. The victim is a man named Stefan Anderson, and Stefan was a research scientist and a professor at the University of Houston, brilliant man, and he was murdered in 2013, I think. I'm drawing a blank here, by a woman named Anna Trujillo. And Anna killed him by pummeling him over and over and over again with her stiletto heel.
Ooh.
It was like a scene out of a movie.
Right.
Yeah, when the police arrived, there was so much blood on the walls that they thought that Stefan had been shot, that it was a gunshot. But it was actually from being hit over and over again with a shoe. Now,
why did you pick this true crime case to write your book, Possessed?
Well, you know, when I first heard about it, I wasn't going, even though I live in Houston, I wasn't going to pick this case. It was just really sensational. I was in London at the time on vacation, and they were carrying it on the BBC, and it was on over and over and over again. And I thought maybe it was just getting almost too much attention. And it was getting attention because of the way Stefan died, because of the murder weapon. And then when I got back to the States and I got home to Houston and I started reading the newspaper articles, it really became kind of a fascinating case because Anna was saying that this was a result of domestic violence, that Stefan had attacked her, and that she used the only weapon she had available, which was her shoe. But the more I got into it, even just reading the newspaper articles and asking around a little bit, it became more and more doubtful that Anna was really a victim, and that perhaps this was a case kind of reverse domestic violence where Stefan was the victim. And then there were these other fascinating parts about the occult that kept popping up.
Ah. Tell me, what is the most important information you found out about Stefan's past?
Well, Stefan was a brilliant man, but he'd had a troubled childhood. He told friends repeatedly that he had come from an abusive household and that his father had been violent with his mother. And that history played up in the murder scene that night. So really his past became very important. That, and I think just the fact that he had a very difficult time. He was a lonely guy, and he had a difficult time saying no to people. He was one of those people who was always trying to please others and take care of others. And in this instance with Anna Trujillo, that was a very bad thing.
Well, how about Anna's past? What was her past like?
Well, she came to the States with her family shortly after being born in Mexico. And up until about 4 years before the marriage, before the murder, she'd had a pretty unremarkable life, except that, she had done well in life. She hadn't had any problems at the time that 4 years before the murder took place, she was living in a suburb of Houston in a beautiful white brick house with a husband and 2 daughters, and was kind of your typical working mom. She had a really good job with Coca-Cola. And everything then started to change in Anna's life, and that all led her to that night with Stefan.
Now, where did the paranormal or the occult come in?
Well, the first sign of it in the case was on the murder scene that night. The forensic team showed up, and they started going through things, and they started noticing strange notes that were on the table. There were all of these sheets of paper where Anna was drawing concentric circles over and over and over again. And then they opened up her purse and started going through it, and they found a book inside, and it was a tarot card book, and it was open to the death card.
So how did the police do the reach that the occult was involved because of the concentric circles? And then somebody has a book of tarot cards in their purse.
Well, they found out. I don't know that the occult was involved as like a source of this having happened or the reason that this happened. But they found out fairly quickly that Anna believed that she had special powers. And she talked about these powers that night. They brought her down to HPD headquarters in downtown Houston and interrogated her. And in the video interview that they did that night, she talks about having special powers, saying that she can move things with her mind and that she can heal people.
Okay. So what did the police do with this information?
Well, it didn't play into the actual prosecution of the murder because it really wasn't needed.
Right.
But it was just kind of this interesting side of Anna that when I was working on the book, the farther I got into it, the more interesting it was. So there was just a lot going on this case. This is an unlikely murder victim, a university professor, and a woman who is very troubled.
So how did these two meet?
Well, Anna, after she left her husband, was working in downtown Houston and became something of a party girl for about the last 3-4 years of her life. And things just kept kind of plummeting for her. And she ended up moving kind of from man to man to man. And at the point that she met Stefan lived in a beautiful condominium project, a high-rise condo overlooking a golf course in downtown Houston. And Anna was staying with a man that lived about 3 floors above him. And they met in the lobby. And I'm sure that Stefan looked at her and thought, well, she's just this beautiful woman. And, and she was very vivacious. People liked Anna. And I'm sure he had no idea at first that she wasn't entirely what she seemed.
Stand by, Kathryn. You and I have to take our break here for the first set. Exo Nation. Kathryn Casey is our special guest. That's Kathryn Casey. Her website, kathryncasey.com. And we're talking about Kathryn's book, Possessed. This is the Exo, and I am Rob McConnell. We're coming to you from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. And, of course, on the Exo Broadcast Network, Talkstar Radio Network, Mutual Broadcast Network, and iHeartRadio. I'll still like to say hello to all our listeners and friends listening to us on AM 1600 KOHI in St. Helens, Oregon. And welcome back, everyone. Kathryn Casey is our guest this hour. Her website is kathryncasey.com. We're talking about Kathryn's book entitled Possessed. Thanks for joining us tonight, Kathryn. It's nice talking to you. And when did things start to be seen that all was not heavenly bliss between Stefan and Anna?
Well, he was very much in love with her in the very beginning, and then he started to see things that were unusual. Like one night she cut the hose going into the refrigerator, the water line, because she said that there were entities in there and they were talking to her. And there were just odd things happening, and he started to get scared. He started to say to his friends things like, well, Anna gets rough.
Yeah.
And they thought, well, maybe, he didn't mind it. Maybe it was something, kind of their lovemaking or something. But then he started talking about other things, like she would come up behind him and grab him around the neck. And she was strong. Anna was a strong woman. And Stefan got to the point he was frightened of her.
Were there any children in either on either side, either Stefan's or Anna's?
Anna had 2 children from her first marriage.
And
they were adults at that point. And one was still in high school. The other one was an adult at that time. And they were living up in Waco with her family.
So if Stefan was worried and had concerns about his safety and what Anna was doing, why did they stay together?
Well, he didn't want to stay together. He repeatedly would sign paperwork to allow her into the condominium and then revoke it after, sign another form saying, no, I don't want her to be able to come in.
Right.
But Stefan was kind of a creature of habit, and he had a close group of friends, and he went to the same restaurants and bars after work to see his friends in the evening. He liked getting out. He was a single guy, and this was his outlet. And Anna would just started showing up. And then she found ways to get other people to bring her into the condominium, into the condominium. And he kept trying to get her out of his life, but, she kept getting back in. And I think she saw Stefan as, at the end there, as her last hope. He was the only one. She got into an altercation and ended up at his flat or his condo that day. And she tried other friends. No one would take her in. So Stefan was really the last one willing to help her out.
Tell us about the night Stefan died.
Well, they had gone out. They went out quite often. Both of them drank quite heavily. They were at a bar outside downtown Houston. And Anna was dancing in the seat and having fun and talking to the other people at the bar and just really enjoying herself. Stefan sat over kind of by himself really quietly in a corner. And then it was closing time, and he got the cab to go home. And Anna started an argument with the cab driver and became belligerent in the cab. And it was so bad that when they got to the condominium project and Anna got out, the woman cab driver, told Stefan that she was afraid for him, and actually prayed with him for a minute, held his hands and prayed with him, and said that she was afraid that his friend might hurt him. And he walked through the lobby and walked upstairs, and Stefan was never seen alive again.
What was the crime scene like? And when do they believe, from the time Stefan and Anna got back to the condo until the time that the police believe the homicide took place? What type of timeline are we looking at?
Well, they got in about 2 o'clock in the morning, and Anna walked in first, and then Stefan followed her upstairs a few minutes later. Mm-hmm. And the timeline that was given at the trial, and I think it's probably a pretty good guess, is that it all happened around 2:13.
Wow.
Because at 2:13, the neighbor woke up, And this is a solidly built condominium project with, I mean, heavy walls in between the units. But the neighbor woke up and there was a lot of banging going on. She thought that furniture was being moved in the next room, in the next condo, in Stefan's condo. And she heard shouting, she heard yelling, and she was getting ready to go over there to talk to them. But by the time she got to the entryway to leave, the yelling had stopped and it got quiet. And after that, she didn't hear anything else. It was quiet. So they believe that he died, or that the actual assault happened around 2:15.
Why do you think the taxi driver didn't call the police and tip the police off that, she had these two fares and that she feared for the life of one of the fares?
Stefan told her he'd be okay. She had talked to him about going to a hotel, said she would drop him off somewhere, and he insisted, no, he'd be all right, he would be fine. So, she left that night, I guess, thinking that, well, I mean, how many times do we look back later and say, gee, I wish I had done something different? But, she had no way of knowing what would happen.
What was the crime scene like itself inside the apartment when the police arrived?
It was really horrific. Stefan's body was at the end of kind of a T-shaped hallway. You walked into the entryway, and then you go to the right to get to the living room and the left to get to the bedroom. And it was right there against that wall that you saw when you walked in. And there was blood on all three of the walls, low to the floor, and just blood splatter all over. And his body was just pocked and covered with these wounds. And there was a pool of coagulating blood near his head. The police didn't get there. They weren't called until about an hour later. I think it was around 3:30.
That doesn't make sense then. That doesn't make sense then.
Well,
because at 2:13, if at 2:13 the homicide was committed, I highly doubt that blood would start coagulating, within an hour.
Well, it does start to thicken, yeah, and it is thickened in the pictures. His body just bled out so quickly. And he had so many wounds around his head that, as I said, they thought that he had suffered a gunshot wound to the head. So it was just one of those things. She said that, as I said, she said that he had attacked her.
Right.
But one of the problems with that scenario is that she had no defensive wounds at all on her body, and his body was covered with them. His arms and hands were both covered where he tried to shield his face. And the other thing was that all of the blood, or the majority of the blood, was within 2 to 3 feet of the floor, which meant that the wounds that he suffered while he was laying on the floor.
How big of a man was Stefan?
He was around 5'9", and he was kind of pudgy, maybe 190 pounds. So he wasn't a big man. He was an older man. He was 59 years old and not strong. And
what was the physical appearance of Anna? How tall was she?
Anna is about 5'6", and I think she was around 120, 130 pounds. But Anna had gone to massage school, and she was strong. But the big thing was that, as I said, she had no defensive wounds on her body at all. His hair was found on the living room couch where they think that was the point of the first attack, and she pulled some of his white hair out. And but there was none of her hair found. And the thing that was so hard, I think, for so many people to understand was that Stefan apparently never fought back. He never raised his hand to her and tried to fight her off when this happened. All he did was try to defend himself by blocking her from hitting him.
Why wouldn't he have run into another room and closed the door?
Well, I think he tried that, but I don't think it appeared from the path he had taken that he was trying to get out of the condo because he was in the living room when he was first attacked, and he was at the entryway, the end of the entryway hallway when he collapsed. But remember what I said earlier, Rob, about Stefan growing up in that household where his father had been abusive?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Well, he had told all of his friends, everybody his entire life that I spoke with, that one of the great sadnesses of his life was that he hadn't been able to protect his mother, and that he would never raise his hand to a woman.
All right, stand by. You and I have to take our break at the bottom of the hour for the news. X-Zone Nation. Kathryn Casey is our guest, www.kathryncasey.com. And we'll both be back as we continue here in the X-Zone from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't go away. Welcome back, everyone. Kathryn Casey is our special guest. We're talking to Kathryn about her book entitled Possessed. Her website is www.kathryncasey.com. That's Kathryn Casey.com. Kathryn, did either one of these, Stefan or Anna, have previous criminal records or notices or flags that the police were aware of?
Well, Anna had been picked up for drunk driving a couple of times. When she, like I said, when she got to Houston, she became kind of a party girl. She thought that in her childhood she hadn't been able to enjoy herself the way she should have been, that she didn't have a lot of freedom. And I gather that what happened was she was in her 40s and she was feeling deprived, so she went out and really got involved in the nightlife. And that broke up her marriage, and she ended up, like, as I said, going from one man to the next and drinking too much. So she had a record. Stefan didn't. Stefan was just kind of this white-haired, little dottery-looking university professor.
What did the friends say about Stefan and Anna? Were they surprised?
Well, they had no. Well, no, they understood immediately who had been the aggressor, and they had been warning him for a long period of time to separate from Anna. And as I said, he really honestly did try. At one point, she came up to him in a restaurant when he was trying to stay away from her. He was in one of his usual places with another professor, and Anna walked up to him and bit him on the cheek, and he started to bleed. It had looked as if she was going to give him a kiss, but she actually bit him. And afterward, he spent quite a bit of time crying and talking with the other professor about how he had tried over and over again to get her out of his life.
Did he ever think of getting a protection order?
You know, he didn't. I don't know if he ever thought about it, but he never did take that step. He was embarrassed that this was happening to him. He said to people, quite a few people, a lot of guys think they're supposed to be kind of macho and that women aren't supposed to, be doing these things to them. And he was embarrassed, and he was afraid.
Afraid of what?
Afraid of Anna, which he was capable of.
Do you think the fact that he was a meek, mild professor, that she was somebody that he was someone she could control, was part of the formula for disaster?
Well, these cases are always all about psychology and kind of the dynamics of the relationship. And that was a big part of what was going on here, and that's why she thought she could control him and why he would be the last one.
Wow.
That if she really needed somebody, Stefan was the only one who had come through for her at that last point in her life. And the theory of the prosecution at the trial was that that night Stefan had gone upstairs and told Anna that it was finally really over, that he was done with her. Here she'd gotten, abusive with his taxi driver, caused a horrible scene yet again. She'd done this before. And that at that point, she just became enraged.
How long did the trial last?
It was 3 weeks. It was a 3-week trial, which in Texas is not overly long.
No.
We tend to do 6-7 weeks here at times.
Was there any awe-inspiring moment or anything that the district attorney was able to bring up during the trial that kind of put everybody in a spin?
There were some really interesting moments in the trial. One of them was when they pulled out the tarot card book and held it up to the jurors to look at, and there it was, with the skeleton riding the horse, the death card.
Yeah, but like I was saying, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people read tarot cards for entertainment. So I don't.
Well, but they don't usually have the death. They're not usually open to the death card on the night that they killed someone. It put a different spin on it. It was kind of like, what was she thinking about that night? When I was doing the research for my book, I also found out that earlier that day, she had given another friend of hers 3 nickels and told him to put them in his cabinet, and that if he didn't, something horrible would happen that night. So there was something going on. And those notes I was talking about, there were things in the notes where she was asking spirits to present themselves. So this was, there were things going on in that apartment that night. The other thing was when they pulled out the high heel, the stiletto heel, and showed it to the jurors, there was kind of a gasp in the courtroom. It still had Stefan's hair and blood on it. And then there was a demonstration with a CPR dummy that the prosecutor did, where he showed how Anna would have had to have been sitting on top of Stefan, holding him down, while she was hitting him with the shoe.
But was that the prosecutor who was showing that, or a forensic expert?
That was the prosecutor as the model for who stood in for Anna, and they had a forensic expert there, a blood spatter expert, who brought in panels showing where the blood spatter had been to illustrate, what must have happened based on the blood spatter.
It sounds like the prosecutor was quite a showman.
Well, he's a good prosecutor,
Well, I don't know about that.
I think he knew how to connect with the jury, huh?
Well, I think he knew how to take certain parts of what was found at the scene and interpret it and put it into the mind of the jury that it, in fact, was evidence. Like, as a police investigator myself, I would have never, you just can't point to the tarot deck, even though it's open at the page of the death card, and say that the occultism involved. You just can't do that. Any defense lawyer with an ounce of sense in his head could have easily gotten that stricken from the record.
Well, he didn't say that the occult was involved. What he said was that this is, what they did is they put this out there for the jury to know. The fact that this book was open to the death card when it was found that night.
How did he prove that Anna had a long-term interest in the occult?
Well, it didn't really come up until the end of the trial, and it was during the sentencing phase. And then one of her close friends got on the stand and said that Anna, that she was afraid of Anna. And then explained that she was having all of these different things that were happening in her life, that she felt that Anna was, conjuring and doing other things that had influenced her life. So that's really when it played up, was at the end.
And there was only one witness who testified to that?
Yeah, they had the prosecutors really didn't, they didn't see the occult as the motive or anything. I mean, that's not what I'm saying here, Rob. I found that as an interesting part of the case.
Okay.
Because the more I got into it, the more people talked about it. How Anna was very involved in it, that she thought she could heal people, that back in December 12, 2012, how she thought the world was going to, as we knew it was going to end, and she had gotten really involved in the Mayan calendar.
Millions of people did too. Millions of people.
Well, I'm not saying they don't.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is that, to me, this was part of who she was. And it's not the reason that the murder happened. The reason the murder happened, I do believe the prosecutors were right, and she was enraged and angry at Stefan because she had thought that she had control of him, and I don't think at that point she did anymore. But it was part of who Anna is.
Yeah. What was your sentence?
She got life, which is unusual for a woman. You know, women don't usually get life sentences in Texas. There's always that presumption when a woman kills a man that somehow the man had done something to deserve it, you know. He'd been abusive or something had happened. It's very, very unusual for a woman to get a life sentence here in Texas for a crime like this. But she got on the stand. She was on the stand a long time. And, you know, I think the jurors saw the violence and the anger.
Interesting. You and I will come back on the other side of this final break. Kathryn Casey is our special guest this hour. She's the author of Possessed. And if you'd like to find out more about Kathryn, visit her website, KathrynCasey.com. Just a reminder, X-Zone that the X-Chronicles newspaper is now available for you with our compliments at www.xchroniclesnewspaper.com. You can download it in PDF. You can read it online and share it with your friends. Once again, www.xchroniclesnewspaper.com. This is the X-Zone. I am Rob McConnell, and we'll be back on the other side of this final break, continuing our conversation with author Kathryn Casey. This is the X-Zone. Don't go away. Welcome back, everyone. Kathryn Casey is our guest this hour. We're talking to Kathryn about her book entitled Possessed. Her website is KathrynCasey.com. That's KathrynCasey.com. Kathryn, was there ever an appeal put forward by a member of the defense for Anna?
Yes.
And what happened?
They did file an appeal for her. It was denied.
Now, her heritage was Mexican, right? Do you think her heritage played any part in the prosecution?
No, I don't believe so.
No,
There were Hispanic people on the jury. I mean, okay. I don't think it really entered into anything at all. You know, I do think that it was probably Anna's performance on the stand that did her the most harm.
What was it like?
Well, she became really agitated, and she just, even in the courtroom, though, she acted oddly throughout the trial. At one point, they were playing the video of the night that night at the bar before Stefan died, and Anna was kind of sitting in the defense table, dancing in the chair, like she was in the video on the bar. It was like she just didn't really get it, you know. It was like she just.
Is it possible that she had mental issues?
You know, I do think that Anna did have does have some mental issues, and I do think that, you know, all of the alcohol had affected her that night and everything. But you know, there were a lot of things going against her. Those crime scene photos, the viciousness of the attack.
Yeah.
It was just, you know, kind of overwhelming, I think, for the jury. And then when she was on the stand, as I said, she became kind of aggressive and she looked a little erratic, and that can, you know, that hurts.
Was she on any prescribed drugs or medications?
No, And that night they asked her if she had ever been diagnosed with any type of mental illness, and she said no. And the defense didn't put up any kind of defense based on mental defect.
Let me take a guess. He was a public defender.
No, Actually, he was a very well-known attorney here in Houston. His name's Jack Carroll, and he really believed in Anna. He really thought that she was the victim, that this was a case of domestic violence against her. And she was just fighting back.
Huh. But she had been seen being an aggressive person, confrontational before, outside of this case, by other people.
Yeah. She had a history during those 4 years that she was in downtown Houston of assaulting people and doing other things. There was something just really wrong going on with Anna during those years, and she changed really drastically.
Wow. I don't understand why the defense didn't ask for a psychiatric evaluation.
She insisted she was fine. There wasn't any history of mental illness. As I said, up until 4 years before this, she had a really good job at Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
And was making good money and was, living the suburban life.
But don't you agree that a person who was acting like her should have, I asked you before, if she was acting strange, and yes. So why wouldn't a defense attorney, especially her defense attorney, who, according to you, is a very well-known and well-thought-of attorney, why wouldn't he ask for a mental evaluation if she was acting so erratically in the past 4 years?
Well, I think maybe he should have done that. That was something that he could have done. I think he was kind of locked in because she did give this interview to the police. She gave this really long recorded interview to the police in which she explained over and over again exactly how it had unfolded and what she had done, and that it was that Stefan had attacked her and she was just trying to defend herself, that he felt like he was locked into that. And I think he believed that. I think he believed her. But the problem was that none of the forensic evidence matched what she had to say. Plus, Stefan had absolutely no history of being violent with anyone.
No evidence of being reported, no evidence of being violent with anyone, right?
No, he had never. As a matter of fact, his friends described him as being overly gentle, which, as I said, goes back to their childhood and the way, he'd been raised.
So it seems as if these two opposites got together.
When you look at this, Rob, don't you think this is actually kind of a perfect storm?
It sounds like it. It certainly sounds like it.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
It was really hard for the one of the prosecutors, John Jordan, to accept the fact that Stefan didn't try to fight back. It was really hard for him to understand that, but there was absolutely no evidence that Stefan ever raised a hand to her.
Huh. Maybe he raised the hand, but the strike didn't come because Anna decided to get into the defensive system right away and, decided to go on the attack. That would explain why he didn't have any defensive wounds.
Well, it could be. I mean, his arms and hands were covered, from trying to protect his face, and his face was just bludgeoned with this heel.
Okay, let me ask you this. In her previous marriage, had she been a victim of spousal abuse?
She had claimed that in her first, she alleged that in her first marriage, after she was separated from her first husband, that he had returned to the house and sexually assaulted her. And there were also other men in her life who she had talked about as having, been violent with her, or usually having sexually assaulted her or been violent with her, but not her second husband.
Did the police follow up on it? Did the police follow up on any of these leads? And were any of these men who she made the allegations against sexual or physical abuse brought to the trial?
One of them did come in, and he did testify, and he said that rather than that he had not attacked her, but what had happened is that he had walked back into the apartment and she had hit him with a candlestick holder. So he, refuted what she said.
And he didn't go to the police and didn't make a report. Was there any medical report to substantiate his claim?
No, but see, there were also other people. There were 3 other incidences with other men where Anna had attacked them.
Wow.
In the years leading up to Stefan's death.
So where is Anna now?
Anna is in prison up in Gatesville, Texas. There are 2 or 3 women's prisons up there, and she's in one of those.
How has she changed? In fact, has she changed? Has her demeanor changed? Has she been given psychiatric help? Or Do we know anything about Anna now after the trial and being in prison?
I don't know anything about Anna now. They don't usually release any of that information. I did hear from a TV crew that had gone up there that she seemed to be functioning pretty well and, seemed really coherent during the interview. So that's all I know.
Why do you think, besides the case being the case of the stiletto killer, why else would this case hold so much interest?
Well, for me, it held interest because it was, as I said, it was reverse domestic violence. This is usually, the scenario is usually that, a man is stalking or, pursuing and becomes violent with a woman. And I thought it was interesting that Stefan was in this situation. And, it was different for him, I think. Although a lot of victims of domestic violence are very embarrassed and, ashamed of the fact that they're in these situations. It was interesting looking at it from the opposite side.
Do you think
the other thing was who Stefan was. He was this, scientist who held patents and lectured medical students.
Do you think the fact that the topic of spousal abuse and assault is very prevalent in the news these days, that we're going to learn more about these adventures of male and female assaults?
Well, I think we should, because I think if we get this stuff out in the open, then we'll finally understand more about why this happens and how it happens. And once the stigma is gone, then maybe the victims won't hide and cover up. So many of them cover everything. Stefan covered it up. He was showing up with black eyes, and bruises, and a lot of women in that situation go through it, and very often they'll hide it.
I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight, Kathryn. I wish you continued success in X Zone Nation. If you'd like to find out more about Kathryn Casey, her website is www.kathryncasey.com. Man, I'm going to tell you something, X Zone Nation. That case has got more holes in it than a piece of Swiss cheese in Billy Meyer's refrigerator. I don't know. To have a defense lawyer not take a look at all the evidence and say, hey, listen, lady, you've got a screw loose. Let's get you checked. He doesn't do that. He's not doing his job. Mind you, that's why I'm here in the X Zone, because I do my job. We'll be back on the other side of this break. Don't go away.